Hello, and welcome to my channel, or welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be talking about the Hammersmith nude murders. I want to apologize in advance if I pronounce anything wrong. Elizabeth Figg was found dead at 5:10 a.m. on June 17, 1959, by police officers on routine patrol in Dukes Meadows, Chiswick, on the north bank of the River Thames. The park has a reputation as a lover's lane, and prostitutes were known to take their clients there. Elizabeth's body was found on scrubland between Dan Mason Drive and the river's towpath, approximately 200 yards west of Barnes Bridge. Her dress was torn at the waist and open to reveal her breasts. Marks around her neck were consistent with strangulation. Elizabeth's underwear and shoes were missing, and no identification or personal possessions were found. A pathologist concluded that the death had occurred between midnight and 2 a.m. on June 17th. A post-mortem photograph of Elizabeth's face, distributed to the press, was indefinitely recognized by her roommate and her mother. Extensive searches of the area, including the riverbed, failed to find Elizabeth's underwear, black stiletto shoes, or white handbag. A police official theorized that she had been murdered by a client in his car, after removing her shoes and underwear, and that these and her handbag had then remained in the car after the body was disposed at Dukes Meadows. The proprietor of a pub on the opposite side of the river to where Elizabeth was found said that on the night of the murder, he and his wife had seen a car's headlights as it parked in the area at 12:05 a.m. Shortly after the lights were switched off, they heard a woman scream. The body of Gwyneth Reese was found on November 8, 1963, at the Barnes Borough Council Household Refuse Disposal Site on Townsmead Road, Mortlake. The dump was situated 40 yards from the Thames towpath and approximately 1 mile from Dukes Meadows. Gwyneth was naked except for a single stocking on her right leg, extending no further up than the ankle. She had been accidentally decapitated by a shovel which workmen had been using to level the refuse. Hannah Telford was found dead on February 2, 1964, on the Thames foreshore below Linden House, the clubhouse of the London Cornathin Sailing Club, west of Hammersmith Bridge. She had been strangled, several of her teeth were missing, and her underwear had been stuffed in her mouth. Irene Lockwood was found dead on April 8, 1964, on the foreshore of the Thames at Corney Reach, Chiswick, not far from where Telford had been found. With the discovery of this third victim, police realized that a serial murderer was at large. Lockwood was pregnant at the time of her death. Helen Bartholomew, East Lothian born, was found dead on April 24, 1964, in an alleyway at the rear of 199 Boston Manor Road, Brentford. Barthley's death gave investigators the first solid piece of evidence in the case. Flexa paint used in car manufacturing. Police felt that the paint had probably come from the killer's workplace. They therefore focused on tracing it to a business nearby. Mary Fleming's body was found on July 14, 1964, outside 48 Berrymead Road, Chiswick. Once again, paint spots were found on the body. Many neighbors had also heard a car reversing down the street just before the body was discovered. Frances Brown was last seen on October 23, 1964, by a colleague who saw her get into a client's car. On the November 25th, her body was found in a car park on Horton Street, Kenningston. She had been strangled. The colleague was able to provide police with a identikit picture and a description of the car, thought to be a grey Ford Zephyr. Brown had testified as a witness for the defense along with Christine Keeler and Mandy Rice Davis at the trial of Stephen Ward in July 1963. Irish immigrant Bridget Birdie O'Hara was found dead on February 16, 1965, near a storage shed behind the Heron Trading Estate, Acton, where she had been missing since January 11th. Once again, O'Hara's body turned up flecks of industrial paint, which were traced to an electrical transformer near where she was discovered. Her body also showed signs of having been stored in a warm environment. The transformer was a good fit for both the paint and the heating. Chief Superintendent John Durose of Scotland Yard, the detective put in charge of the case, interviewed almost 7,000 suspects. In the spring of 1965, the investigation into the murders encountered a major breakthrough when a sample of paint, which perfectly matched that recovered from several victims' bodies, was found beneath a concealed transformer at the rear of a building on the Heron factory estate in Acton. This factory estate faced a paint spraying shop. Shortly thereafter, Durose held a news conference in which he falsely announced that the police had narrowed the suspect pool down to 20 men, and that by a process of elimination, these suspects were being eliminated from the investigation. After a short time, he announced that the suspect pool contained only 10 members, and then 3. There were no further known stripper killings following the initial news conference. According to the writer Anthony Summers, Hannah Telford and Frances Brown, the stripper's 3rd and 7th victim, were preferably connected to the 1963 Profumo affair. Some victims were also known to engage in the underground party scene in addition to appearing in pornographic movies. Several writers have postulated that the victims may have known each other and that the killer may have been connected to these scenes as well. On April 27, 1964, Kenneth Archibald, a 57-year-old caretaker at the Holland Park Lane Tennis Club, walked into Notting Hill Police Station and voluntarily confessed to the killing of Irene Lockwood. Archibald was charged with the murder and stood trial at the Old Bailey in June 1964. When asked to plead, he retracted his confession and pleaded not guilty. There was no other evidence to link him to the crime, and on June 23, 1964, he was found not guilty by a jury and acquitted by the judge, Mr. Justice Neild. For Durose, the most likely suspect was a Scottish security guard named Mungo Ireland, whom Durose first identified in a BBC television interview in 1970 as a respectable married man in his 40s whom he codenamed Big John. Ireland had apparently been identified as a suspect shortly after Bridget O'Hara's murder, when flecks of industrial paint were traced to the Heron Trading Estate, where he had worked as a security guard. Shortly after his connection was made, Ireland committed suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning, leaving a note for his wife that read, "I can't stick it any longer," and finished, "To save you and the police looking for me, I'll be in the garage." While seen by many as a strong suspect in the killings, recent research suggests that Ireland was in Scotland when O'Hara was murdered, and therefore could not have been the stripper. Crime author Neil Milkins said the killings stopped after Ireland's death and the police task set up to catch the killer was reduced and finally disbanded. Milkins, who wrote the book Who is Jack the Stripper, was an investigative consultant for the BBC documentary Dark Sun, The Hunt for a Serial Killer. On the morning that Ireland's body was found, he had been due to appear before Acton Magistrates Court to face a charge of failing to stop his car after being involved in a road traffic accident. Said Mr. Milkins, "Did Ireland commit suicide to save facing Acton Magistrates over a trifling motoring charge, or did John Durose push him over the edge with his press statements?" The Scotland Yard Serious Crime Review Group reinvestigated the Hammersmith murders between 2006-2007, which resulted in a new conclusion. A statement read, The circumstantial evidence against Mungo Ireland is very strong, and it was the view of the officers conducting the most recent reviews of this case that he was most likely to be responsible. Although Ireland's work records indicated he was in Scotland on the night of O'Hara's disappearance, Scotland Yard believe it is possible that these may have been falsified. In 2001, reformed gangster Jimmy Tippett Jr. claimed that during research for his book about London's gangland, he had uncovered information suggesting the British light heavyweight boxing champion Freddie Mills was responsible for the murders. According to Tippett, Kray-era gangsters, including Charlie Richardson and Frankie Fraser, had long suspected Mills of being the murderer. Mills had previously been linked with the murders by Peter Neal, a freelance journalist from Belham, South London, who told police in July 1972 that he had received information in confidence from a serving chief inspector that Mills killed the nude prostitutes. He also said that this was common knowledge in the West End. Many people would say, "Oh, Freddie did them," in... Mills was found shot dead in his car, apparently by suicide, in July 1965. The suggestion that Mills was the Hammersmith nude murderer originated with gangster Frankie Fraser, who told it to a policeman, Bob Berry, who told the Sun crime reporter Michael Litchfield. Fraser claimed that the story was confessed to Mills to Scotland Yard Chief Superintendent John Durose, told by Durose to him. But when Durose published his autobiography, which touched on the Hammersmith nude murders, there was no mention of Freddie Mills with regard to this case. The claims have since been dismissed. Peter McInnes put the allegations to the investigating officer, who stated that Mills had never been a suspect during the investigation. David Seabrook, in his book, Jack of Jumps, wrote that a former Metropolitan Police detective was a suspect in the opinion of several senior detectives investigating the case. Owen Summers, a journalist for the Sun newspaper, had previously raised suspicion about the unnamed officer's involvement in a series of articles published by the newspaper in 1972, and Daily Mirror journalist Brian McConnell followed a similar line of inquiry in his book, Found Naked and Dead in 1974. He was also considered by Dick Kirby, a former Metropolitan Police detective, in his book, Laid Bare: The Nude Murders and the Hunt for Jack the Stripper, in which Kirby referred to him only as the cop. In their book, The Survivor, Jimmy Evans and Martin Short alleged the culprit was Superintendent Tommy Butler of the Metropolitan Police's Flying Squad. Butler died in 1970. The Crime and Investigation Channel's Fred Dinenge murder casebook put forward the theory that the killer could have been Harold Jones, a convicted murderer from Wales. Jones killed 2 girls in 1921 in his hometown of Abertillery. Because he was 15 at the time, he was not liable for the death penalty and instead received a life sentence. He was released from Wandsworth Prison in 1941 at the age of 35 for exemplary behavior. He is believed to have then returned to Abertillery and visited the graves of his victims. By 1947, Jones was living in Fulham, London. All the stripper murders had similar features to his early murders, with no sexual assault but extreme violence inflicted on the victims. Due to poor record keeping, he was never considered as a possible suspect by the police. Jones died in Hammersmith in 1971. The Welsh writer Neil Milkins, in Who Was Jack the Stripper, also concluded that Jones was the perpetrator. While researching Jones for his book, Every Mother's Nightmare, Milkins had traced the murderer's movements. He turned up in Fulham in the late 1940s, calling himself Harry Stevens, and stayed at the address in Hestercombe Avenue until 1962, at which point he disappeared again. I came across the Jack the Stripper case on the internet and realized that in the same 3 years Jones' whereabouts remained unknown, 1962 to 1965. A number of prostitutes had been murdered in the same West London area. In January 2019, the possible involvement of Jones was re-examined in the 90-minute documentary Dark Sun, The Hunt for a Serial Killer, broadcast on BBC Two. Criminologist Professor David Wilson and an investigative team including former detective Jackie Melton and forensic psychologist Professor Mike Berry use contemporary policing techniques such as geographic profiling and offender profiling to see if the crimes of Jones, the boy, can be measured against those of the London killer. There are many similarities. Thank you for listening. If you like this type of content, please consider subscribing and liking to my channel, and I will see you on the next one.